Okay, welcome back to Contacts. We are here with Jeff Dellis, new athletic director at Monterey High School, former longtime athletic director and basketball coach at Nevada Union High School. Jeff, thanks for taking the time out of your day to talk with us.
Hey, Justin, thanks for having me. It's such a pleasure to sit down and talk athletics and life with you.
That's great, man. Our relationship goes back 20 years, and really excited to sit down and pick your brain a little bit and offer some wisdom to people either just getting into the industry or, reflecting on where they are. So if you could just, take a few minutes, take us through your background as a coach. How did you end up coaching? What was the process of landing your first job and any subsequent jobs since?
Yeah. So, I grew up in Los Angeles, spent a year at San Diego State right out of high school, and pretty quickly transferred to Long Beach State, which was closer to home. I grew up in San Pedro, on the water and on the LA Harbor. Mm-hmm. And, I was going to school, and, my whole plan was, my big picture plan was graduate, go to law school, and practice law. And second year at Long Beach, my high school coach, Jack Kordich, long-time San Pedro coach, played at UCLA. He would tell great stories about being on the freshman team against the Gail Goodrich and Keith Erickson teams that won the first UCLA national title in '64. He'd reached out, heard I was back in town, and asked if I would be interested in coaching the JVs and assisting him on the varsity. So, geez, that's like 1985, 86, 87. And, I just thought, sure, it'd be something to do, kill some time while I'm in school and, pay a couple of bills. And I got to tell you, I was addicted from the get. From the get, I loved being around basketball players again, largely much better basketball players than I ever was as a high school player. I loved the camaraderie of coaches, and immediately I was accepted into this fraternity that we belong to, mm-hmm. of coaches. And so I couldn't get enough clinics. I couldn't get enough camps, summer camps and whatnot, coaching club ball. Two of the first people I had the pleasure of learning from were Tony Carter, who's the coach at LA Harbor, and Doug Mitchell, who's been at Bishop Montgomery since the turn of time. And at the time, they were both assistants at Cal State Dominguez Hills, who was coached by a guy named Dave Yanai. Yep. And Yanai's part of that extended Knight family. Mm-hmm. And I was blessed to be able to hang out with those guys and Coach Yanai and just learn these pearls of wisdom about the game of basketball. And Yanai and Coach Knight and Coach Newell, they're all big picture guys. They're the life lessons. And so I just feel incredibly blessed that over the years I've had an opportunity to learn from those people, right? Mm-hmm. And to realize that what we do is important, and it's not important necessarily in terms of wins and losses. And I'm not about moral victories. I like to win as much as the next guy, but for me, basketball is this great metaphor for life, right? And this, you make a mistake at one end, you have an opportunity at the other end to fix it. And so that's how I started as a JV basketball coach. I was 21 years old at my alma mater, and I did that for 3 years. From there, I went on to assist a good friend of mine, Todd Mursky, at Merrill Est High School, which is Palos Verdes. And I did that for 2 years, and I met my future wife. And even at this time, I was still planning on going to law school. It was, I hadn't changed my plan quite yet. But my wife, who's an educator as well, is from a sleepy little town in Northern California, in Nevada City. And for me, it was love at first sight. I'm not sure that she shared the same feeling. It may have taken her a moment longer to process that, but when it became apparent that we were going to try to do this thing, somebody had to move. And you don't go to law school in Nevada City. It's Davis your alma mater is an hour and a half away. And so the idea of trying to do that it just wasn't practical. So I changed up, I got my teaching credential, and was fortunate enough to get a teaching job in Nevada Union High School. So right before that, before we did that, my wife and I went overseas and taught. And we were on this island in the Mediterranean, Cyprus, and I had the opportunity to coach a professional team, which was a fascinating experience. You know, each team, as is typically the case in Europe, you're allowed X amount of Americans or foreign-born kids, and we had 2 kids from one was Avery Johnson's running mate at Southern, Kevin Florent, who's fabulous player, and John White, who played at Southern Miss. And so these guys were legit. I mean, it just goes to show you how this game of basketball has grown internationally. They were head and shoulders above everybody at that point. And the game has evolved so much internationally that, you know, who knows, you don't need to rely on those foreign-born people like you did back in the day. Now it's inverse, right? Now you've got the Jokic's and the Doncic's and people from all over the world that are taking roster spots in the NBA. So I had a chance to coach professionally for a year, and it was a great experience. It's not something that I would want to do lifetime. It's really all about wins and losses, and lessons are secondary. So I did that for a year. My wife and I ended up coming back to the States, and that's when I began my career at Nevada Union. And I was able to coach there. I was varsity assistant for a few years with a good friend of mine, Ryan Curry. When Ryan left, I was offered the head job, and I did that for about 15 years. Took a couple of years off when my kids were at an age when I thought that they required more attention. And so I did that for a number of years. And, basketball is near and dear to my heart for all the reasons that I've identified, the life lessons and whatnot. So I have been a one-time head coach, one school for about 15 years. And then I transitioned into athletics, and did both for a couple of years. And, in high school, public high school for sure, coaching is a full-time gig, athletics is a full-time gig, and teaching is a full-time gig. And so I really, at that time, was doing basically 3 jobs, and something had to go. And I was fortunate enough to have coaches in my basketball program that were ready. I've always felt as a basketball coach, as a coach in general, my job is to train my successor. And so I think we did a good job of training up our younger coaches, much like you did at El Camino. And you left the program better than you found it, and you left it in good hands. And so, I was able to hand it off to Mark Casey, who did a great job, who's doing a great job at Nevada Union, hoping to bring him down here for the Stevenson tournament. And it's a good program. And I also got a chance to move into new leadership roles in athletics full-time. And then my wife and I moved down here to the Central Coast last year. She got a job in Carmel. She works in the Carmel School District. And in the last year, the district here, Monterey Peninsula, saw fit to create more of an opportunity for athletics. And and so that's how I've landed here.
Awesome stories, Coach. I forgot about your time overseas, and that's a different rabbit hole that we can go down another day. And the listening to that and processing, especially the statement where it was like, where you mentioned, how do you leave something better than you found it, and make sure that you're training those behind you to take care of something. And I've often reflected that Tony Volps, who took over for me at El Camino, actually coached there longer than I did, and just retired. Last year was his first year stepping away. And so it's really awesome to reflect on that while you're telling that story, and the impact that you can have even from afar if you approach things in a way that is forward thinking rather than kind of being stuck in the moment. With that,
let me just say real quickly, with regards to Tony, and you and I met when you were at El Camino, and I was at Nevada Union, and you were very supportive of my program and of the greater basketball community. And Tony continued your traditions, and we ran a tournament similar to your Stevenson tournament, where we brought in teams from outside the area, and we housed everybody. Mm-hmm. And Tony and would bring the El Camino kids up. They always they always conducted themselves with a lot of respect. And again, that doesn't happen overnight. That happens because Tony was well trained as a coach. And we were talking earlier about Eddie Wilson, and wherever you go, Justin, you leave things better than you found them, and that's certainly the case with El Camino.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. And before we get into what I was going to ask, it reminded me of something else, the Fraternity of Coaches, and how the interconnectedness of it. So you mentioned Davey and I, who was at Cal State Dominguez, but when I was at Davis, he had left and gone to Cal State LA.
Right.
Had built that program, and we played them on an annual basis. And, I got to watch him firsthand, up close and personal. And then you also mentioned sports as a metaphor for life. And then that story about Tony, I think, captures that. And I'm sure there's a million other stories that'll come out during our conversation that reflect that. And, I've often said that sports are a vehicle to teach leadership and to teach how to be part of something bigger than yourself. Yes. And that's really what we lean into here programmatically. And I'm sure, in your way, that's the same messaging that your coaches are receiving and your kids received while you were coaching them. So that leads me into, in your transition now, we're going into year one of you being an athletic director, and, you left coaching at Nevada Union. And if you were going to go, coach again, I'm sure there's some things that evolved over time, but it really, when you stepped into that first role, when Ryan left, when you stepped into the AD role, when that became available, when you're stepping into this new gig, 20 years later, after having a successful run as an athletic director the first time around, what are you realizing that you still need to figure out?
Yeah, I think that you nailed on the head. None of us have all the answers. And I think maybe the first thing that I have figured out is A, I don't have all the answers, and B, I don't have to have all the answers, right? And when I don't have the answers, I've got to be humble enough to ask the right questions. And so I think this will sound strange, but I think I've become more humble over time, and more respectful of, there's a million different ways to catch a fish. I've got my way, but I'm going to steal from you what works for you. And as long as we're doing it with honor and remembering that it's about kids and it's about the opportunities to grow, I think, on the bottom of my emails, I have a quote from a really good friend of mine, Marty Lombardi, one of my favorite names, Marty Lombardi from North Beach. And he says, we're all practicing for adulthood. Mm-hmm. And, it sort of keeps me centered on what's important. Mm-hmm. And it's not about me, it's about we. And you said it a moment ago, what I can do individually is relatively. Let me think. Yep. So you said it a moment ago. Being part of something larger than yourself. I just don't know that there's a better feeling than being part of a bigger picture. To me, there's so much comfort in that. And what I can do individually is relatively finite. But what we can do as a group, whether it's a team or as an organization, the sky's the limit.
Absolutely. So to that point, it's funny, you mentioned as I've gotten older, I've gotten humbler. And in these conversations that I've been fortunate enough to be having based on the network, right, and the Rolodex here of contacts and that fraternity we've grown over the years, it's I wouldn't say it's funny. It's refreshing that the older we get, the more we realize that we don't have the answers, and we almost become more willing to try other things, pick people's brains. When I took over in this role, I had a guy that was in place before me that was here for 36 years, and then a colleague that did it for 2 years before transitioning to me. And so I had that 36-year bank of institutional history,
Right.
2-year transition to pick, Kelly's brain and Coach Young's brain before that. But I also got on the horn with Todd Buller, who
Yep.
was the longtime AD at PG, and I went and spent a couple hours with him to ask questions. And then I was able to bring Dr. Forkham in, who's a legend in the athletic administration space, as an associate AD and as my mentor while I try to figure out what's going on. And, being able to acknowledge, those gaps and the blind spots you have and try to fill them has been super helpful. And it speaks to what you just mentioned. As you've been fortunate to be in the AD role now and to almost enable yourself to be more of an observer, looking across different programs and then even thinking back to your own program. If you were to drop back into a basketball job, what is the best thing that you felt you guys did at Nevada Union that you would try to bring with you? Or what is the thing as an administrator you're trying to bring with you from Nevada Union and have it fit the culture and the mission and vision of Monterey?
Sure. So it's funny, I think I've talked recently about how quickly culture can change. Mm-hmm. And when it changes quickly, it's typically not for the better. Mm-hmm. And, I've had I don't even want to characterize it as misfortune or fortune. I've had the experience of seeing the culture of a high school change dramatically in a very short period of time. And, not necessarily needing to go into the details of it. Within 2 years, we went from being one of the more prominent programs in the Sac Joaquin section across the board for all sports to, things deteriorating, not just in terms of wins and losses, but just in terms of the culture and how we were considered in our community. In a small community like Nevada County, Grass Valley, Nevada City, similar to Monterey, the school can be the hub of the community. On the other hand, it can be to the detriment of the community. We're all in the business of trying to attract more kids to your school, whether you're public or private. You're trying to get kids to come to your school, and all you have to do is look at Zillow and see how a school is rated. Right, it's one of the first things that's pointed out. And Nevada Union went from bragging about when the properties were selling about how well we were doing academically mm-hmm. and athletically, and things turned sideways pretty quickly. And what deteriorated in a year or two took 5, 6, 7 years to rebuild. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we had this 2-year downturn, and we did what no one wanted to experience that. And if we'd been more introspective, if we had kind of seen some of the red flags, the warnings prior to that, then we would have been able to deal with it. But the reality is that we did experience it, and it required us to ask ourselves some really difficult questions and do a self-inventory. Mm-hmm. And I don't think Monterey is in that kind of downturn that Nevada Union was in. That doesn't mean there aren't things we can work on in terms of the culture here. Mm-hmm. So we've adopted a model that we use at Nevada Union called Athlete Committed, which is an organization run by a guy named John Underwood. Mm-hmm. And a lot to do. There's a lot of great organizations out there. PCA, Character Combine, Character Counts. All of those are great organizations. But what I find that's great about Athlete Committed is that it drives performance. It's about perform, and that's what kids are most interested in. Is we have these opportunities for these character conversations, but kids want to know what's going to benefit my performance. And so that what Athlete Committed does is it focuses on things like sleep, nutrition, strength and conditioning, discouraging blue light, all those things that we know are important, and there's a lot of science behind it. So it's something that we're adopting here. Because we want to change the culture. And kids, we had our first Athlete Committed meeting today. Here we are, we're in distance learning, and we had 30 kids sign on to this meeting. We're getting coaches that are excited about it. Coaches are excited about being part of something larger than themselves. Mm-hmm. And like any school, it's really easy for programs to silo. most of our coaches are off-campus coaches.
Mhm.
And so the responsibility falls on me and the athletic department and the school, frankly, to make them feel part of the campus, right? Part of something larger than themselves. They're not just, a baseball program or a softball program or whatever. They're part of something larger than themselves. And so that's what I think I bring with some experience, is that I've walked this path before,
Yeah.
and I don't have all the answers. And every school has its unique challenges and opportunities, but I think there's nothing that replaces experience. That's why you and I network with coaches that are older than us. That's why you reached out to Coach Bueller and to your predecessor. And that's why I've reached out to the likes of Ken Asaki and Ken White and Mr. Albert, because those people have been in my shoes before, and they have some institutional memory. I love that phrase, that institutional memory. And I'm the new kid on the block here, but you know what? We can commiserate the role that athletics has played in our life, the role that school has played in our lives, and we're better together, right?
Absolutely. And I think that term institutional memory or knowledge is very different since the millennium versus what happened before. Because record keeping is a lot easier.
Right.
And so, making sure we tap into that generation before we don't have access anymore is vitally important. You mentioned the athlete committed program that you thought was really valuable from a top-down culture perspective of the program. What about sports specific? So when you were coaching basketball and you're going out and you're watching other Nevada Union teams practice that aren't basketball, or other schools, or you're coaching your kids in youth sports, what was the best thing that you were able to take and implement that allowed for, instant impact on one of your teams?
That's a great question. I remember taking my basketball team. We used to go to the Mission Prep tournament in San Luis Obispo all the time. And, like a lot of coaches, I always wanted to offer my kids some kind of opportunity that was different than what they were used to. And so I mentioned the tournament that we hosted, at Nevada Union. We would always bring teams in from the city, and would give us an opportunity to work to work with kids, to have an opportunity to meet with kids that were different than the kids in Nevada County, which is very rural, white. And so we would go to the beach for a tournament every year. And Russell White, who's the coach at Cal Lutheran now, at that time he was the coach at Calabasas. And he did some things with his kids pregame that it was a shout out, but it was so authentic. It wasn't, I'm not a big rah-rah guy. That's not my personality. But neither was Russell. But he just did this shout out thing with his kids that I was just so impressed with, and they all bought in. And we adopted it at Nevada Union, and I would fail if I tried to explain it. It'd be one of those things you have to actually see. Right. But again, picking up things from coaches in other sports, I think is so valuable. We used to take our basketball team and head down to wrestling tournaments. There'd be, we'd be in one gym and wrestling would be in the other, and we were finishing our practice and we'd go and sit in on their games. Or our swim team would go to a soccer game in their skivvies. They'd get out of the pool and they'd go to the water polo. Kids would go to the soccer and they would streak, right? And again, it was just, I think that the most valuable, the most successful programs, and I'm not talking again about wins and losses, but in terms of culture, are programs in which different groups of athletes hold each other in a very high esteem, that they have almost an awe of one another. And, as a basketball player, I have no idea how tough it is what water polo kids do, but I can respect it and I can be in awe of it because it's a hard sport, right? And so, I love when kids hold each other in this high esteem, and that's a great life lesson, that we may do different things, but we're part of the same. We're part of the same group.
Yep. And I think it's funny that you mentioned that. I often talk to our students about choosing a sport because, co-curricular activities here are obligatory. They need to do something. And often they'll come in and they haven't done something. And our boys will ask me, hey, what should I do? I'm like, look, you have 3 options in the fall: cross country, football, and water polo. And every single one of them is going to benefit you, right? If you're playing football, there's a certain toughness that's needed. If you're running cross country, it's a different type of toughness because you're out there running, and to quote, one of my colleagues, everything in your body is telling you to quit and you have to keep going. And then water polo, I always say, look, you're in a sport where they're trying to drown you and you have to stay above the water and compete. So any one of them is a win. Pick, it doesn't matter, just dive in. And heck, our theater program as well, it's like, hey, you got to go stand on stage and be in front of a bunch of people and deliver. There's value in any one of these school activities in regards to how are you growing as a person. And so I think that's a great way to capture that. And those anecdotes are really helpful for people.
My son, my younger kid, both my kids went to Nevada Union. And I had the good fortune of coaching my younger kid for 2 years. And what I say about coaching my own kid is that it's the best and the worst, right? And so while I enjoyed doing it for 2 years, I wouldn't want to make a career of having to coach my own kids. But when he was a freshman, our family rule is that you had to do something extracurricular freshman year, sort of, for the very reasons that Stevenson requires it, is, you're immediately expanding your pool of friends. You're doing something that's social. And so, originally he was going to do football, and he did football through the summer. And, you're familiar with NU football. It's a big deal. And the coaches are great. And, but about a month in, he realized it wasn't for him. And so he asked, I don't want to do this, and the season hasn't started, so would you mind if I quit? And I said, well, you can't quit. You can move on to another sport if you want. And and he's built like I am. I said, you're obviously not a cross country kid. So, what do you want to do? And he goes, well, I'll try water polo. And he went to water polo for 1 day. And at the end of the practice, he got back in the car and I said, how was that? And he goes, can I go back to football tomorrow?
Exactly.
Right. Those kids are nuts. Those kids are nuts.
They're so tough.
They are.
That's funny that you mentioned that was the rule. So I have, and I share this with our students here, that the house rule at my house is you're going to go on the sophomore wilderness trip, which we have, which is 11-day backpacking trip that our school runs. And you're going to play 3 sports a year until you decide you want to pursue something at an elite level. And at that time we can have a conversation about what that looks like. And if you want to do that, great. If you don't, then you're going to do this. And it's not to be punitive. It's because of the values and what it means to be a role on a particular team and then be in a different role, right? And learning how to star in the role you have, because it's the metaphor for life that you shared earlier, right? And so I think that trickles out into our culture here and what we ask of these kids. And, it's something that you mentioned throughout this conversation of what's important, what does success look like? It's not always wins and losses, but how you grow people. And on that, if you were going to, think about your approach to coaching, right? When you mentioned, at 21 years old, you're coaching a JV team, thinking about being a lawyer and doing something just on the side to stay engaged versus now, right? How has your approach to coaching changed over the years? And obviously you can't track it year by year, but the things that you were prioritizing then versus what you would put energy into now, how has that changed throughout that time?
The way that I related to my student athletes has evolved. When I was 21 years old, we were probably listening to the same kind of music, me and my boys. And, I could speak to them in a way that was more, it was more on an equal level. I was the coach, they were the players, but because of the lack of an age gap, I related to them in a different way. And so I think, we all have to evolve. And one of the ways that I've evolved is I've always made sure that I've had young assistants. somebody who can remain relevant in those kids' lives, on that level, on the music front, or even the way that they talk, or even, nowadays with social media. My assistant coaches have always, they can stay in Snapchat, and they can, they can decipher what the acronyms mean, and I mean, those kind of silly things. And it's not that my role with kids is weaker. In fact, I think I have more wisdom to offer in a lot of ways, a broader perspective. But for them to buy into me, being that there's now a 30, 40 year gap, right? I'm 56 now, and they're in the teens. That's 40 years. We have different life experiences, and I frankly don't know that I have the energy to stay engaged on that level, right? On that, I'm not gonna start a TikTok account. I'm not gonna, right? I'm not listening to the music they listen to, but there's ways to narrow that gap by who I surround and include in their lives. I'm a big proponent of having big staffs. As a basketball coach, my last couple of years at NU, I was the only member of the staff that wasn't a Nevada Union grad, and I wanted to make sure that each level had at least 2 coaches.
Yep.
And I didn't want them to be twins. I wanted them to bring different life experiences to the program. And so I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's kind of, I think I'm more effective than I was back then. I had a kid in here earlier today that is struggling. He's struggling with distance learning. He's struggling with his emotions. He's experienced a pretty significant injury, and I can help him in ways now that I wouldn't have had the resources. I wouldn't have had the life experiences that I can share with him now, right? And so that's the benefit of being able to stay somewhere for a period of time. How long have you been at Stevenson now?
This is year 11.
Year 11. So I mean, that's and you had a long stretch at El Camino, and I think my biggest fear coming to Monterey was I don't have that track record with Monterey kids, and so I've got a very tighter window because I can see light at the end of the tunnel of my career, and I want to make sure this last gig that I leave this place better than I found it, and to that end I'm going to have to accelerate that trust process that it takes time, right? Yep. And when I first started coaching, I think I was certainly more about wins and losses, and I don't think that I've lost my competitive edge. I just think that I understand its role and how important the process is in achieving those kinds of benchmarks like wins.
Well, I think that's important that, you get to that point and you realize, okay, here's the shift in my approach. Here's the shift in my mentality. And here's how I've evolved through experience. But let's say you don't have that experience, right? You have to go in and you have to do it in the moment. What advice would you give to your younger self if you were able to have a time machine and go back and be like, all right, hey, here's the keys.
Right.
Here's what I can tell you to help you land well.
Yeah. So I think, you talked about when you first took over at Stevenson, reaching out to your predecessor, reaching out to the AD at PG. I think humbling yourself to not having to do everything yourself, and to go find stuff out, educate yourself, use the resources around you. And my experience in every facet of my life, whether it be as a teacher, as a husband, as a father, as a coach, when I reach out to others, I'm absolutely blown away at people's willingness to share their experience, strength, and hope with me. I was in the SFL, the Sierra Foothill League, which is arguably the best league in California. Certainly, I mean, with the WCA AL can lay claim to it. The SFL can make a legitimate claim across the board. Folsom, Oak Ridge, Rockland, Granite Bay, Del Oro, Nevada Union, some of the heavyweights of Northern California athletics across the board. I mean, if there was a Tiddlywinks competition, they would compete.
Yeah.
And I walked into the lion's den of the athletic directors of that league, and absolutely humbled by their willingness to share ideas related to athletic programs, of successful athletic programs. Same thing with basketball. You know, when I first got the gig at NU, you know, you and others were so willing to help out and offer. You know, there were no trades. I mean, maybe there were, but I didn't know about it. The people were so willing to share practice plans and how to deal with this, that, or the other, and share forms and all the things that, you know, when you're first starting out, you have no idea. You don't even know what questions to ask. So I think that the willingness to humble yourself enough to realize that you don't have, nor are you expected to have all the answers. Reach out to people, and if you can find a good mentor, someone who can guide you, take advantage of that.
Absolutely, Coach, and that's great advice, especially as you're getting your foot in the door. And it's interesting. We've talked about it a couple of times on this episode, which is as we get older, we almost reach out more. And I think there's a component of security that goes with that, and confidence, because when you're young and you're insecure and you feel you have to prove yourself, most of the time it's the outcomes that then somehow validate you, right? And if you can get past that, and to your idea of how do you define success, right? You need to do that institutionally. You need to do that programmatically. Yes. And as long as that's attached to wins and losses as the only metric, often, you know, you're going to come up short, right? Only one team can win each year. And so I think to that point, you know, when you're in the trenches early on and you're looking across the bench at the rival, you know, you're not always willing to go talk to that guy, and often, or that gal, that's going to be your best resource, right? They're in the same league with you. They're playing the same people. They may be in the same school district, right? In the San Juan Unified. And as soon as you can get over the nerves or the roadblocks to having those conversations, you know, the sky's the limit, because now you have the keys and you have the answers to the test.
Right. Because you're really doing the same job, right? I mean, it's a very small community of athletic directors. It's a relatively small community of basketball coaches that, you know, there's a lot of coaches, but, you know, there's some that you know, you're just not going to see eye to eye with because they have a different agenda. Okay. But by and large, you tap into the people that are on the same page as you. It's a relatively small community. And so we got to support one another. We need one another. We need opponents. We need colleagues.
100%. And thank you for saying that. I still remember we were at UC Santa Barbara team camp one year, listening to Danny Yoshikawa come in and talk. And one of the things he said is we need more of this collaborative effort versus kind of sniping one another and you know, bringing negativity to the profession. And I think this is a great, you know, end to the conversation about, you know, how do you reach out? You know, people aren't going to say no for the most part. They want to share. They want to help you. And they know, the ones that are willing to share also know they can learn something from you.
For sure.
No matter how trivial it is.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a great piece of advice. And thank you for sharing your time today, your wisdom, and good luck as you know, take the reins there and lead it into the next chapter of Monterey Toreador sports.
Yeah, Justin, I'm humbled by your friendship, and I look forward to working next to you for the foreseeable future.
Absolutely. Can't wait. Talk soon.
Take care.